The red warning lights had been flashing for 3 days straight. Dr. Mira Thorne wiped the sweat from her forehead as she worked frantically at her research station. Around her, alien scientists from 7 different species packed their equipment and prepared to evacuate. The great Kepler 186 research facility was being abandoned, just like hundreds of other outposts across the galaxy. Outside the station's massive windows, the dying star cast an orange glow over the chaos. Ships of every shape and size filled the space around the facility. Some looked like living coral, others resembled massive crystals that sparkled in the starlight. A few appeared to be made entirely of liquid metal that flowed and shifted as they moved. These were the vessels of the Galactic Council, the 7 species that had ruled the known universe for over 3,000 years. But now they were all running. Mira's research partner, Dr. Finn O'Brien, rushed over with his arms full of data, storage devices. His face was pale with worry. "Mira, we need to leave now. The last transport ship departs in 20 minutes. The Devourers will be here within hours." She looked up from her workstation, where streams of data flowed across multiple screens. For months, she had been studying the reports coming in from the Outer Rim territories. Entire star systems had gone dark. Colonies with billions of inhabitants had simply vanished. Ships that went to investigate never returned. The enemy wasn't just conquering territory. They were erasing it completely. "You go ahead, Finn. I need to finish this." Her colleague stared at her in disbelief. "Finish what?" "Everyone is evacuating. There's nothing left to study here." Mira turned back to her screens. The data she was analyzing told a story that terrified the Council species. The Devourers came from the void between galaxies. They were ancient beings that consumed not just planets and stars, but the very essence of life itself. Wherever they passed, space became empty and cold. No energy, no matter, no trace that anything had ever existed there. The Council's finest military minds had tried everything. The Mindari, who could read thoughts across star systems, found their telepathy useless against beings that seemed to have no minds to read. The Vorthak had built massive crystal weapons that could shatter planets, but the Devourers absorbed the energy and grew stronger. The aquatic Deepkin had tried to hide their colonies in the depths of ocean worlds, but the enemy found them anyway. Every defense had failed. Every weapon proved useless. The greatest civilization in the galaxy was running away from an enemy they couldn't understand or defeat. But Mira had noticed something the Council had missed. She was human, and humans were considered primitive by galactic standards. Her species was barely noticed by the mighty Council. Earth was treated like a nature preserve, with humans living on one small world while the galaxy's real business happened elsewhere. That dismissive attitude was about to become the Council's salvation. The data on Mira's screens showed patterns that the advanced alien minds had overlooked. The Devourers didn't attack randomly. They fed on something specific: fear, despair, the feeling of inevitable defeat. The more hopeless their victims felt, the stronger the Devourers became. The Council species, with their logical minds and careful planning, had created a perfect feeding ground for these monsters. But humans were different. Mira's fingers flew across the control panel. She activated the station's quantum transmitter, the same device used to send research reports back to Council headquarters. But instead of aiming the signal toward the galactic core, she pointed it toward a small, unremarkable star system on the galaxy's outer edge, Earth. The transmission burst contained everything: 3 months of combat reports, detailed analyses of Devourer tactics and capabilities, technical specifications of Council weapons, and why they had failed. Most importantly, it contained Mira's theory about what the Devourers really were and how they might be defeated. As the signal raced through folded space toward humanity's home system, alarms began blaring throughout the research station. The evacuation was complete. Only Mira remained. She sealed the transmission with a simple message: This is Dr. Mira Thorne, human xenobiologist. The galaxy is dying. The Council has failed. We need help. Please respond." Finn's voice crackled through the communication system from the last transport ship. "Mira, what are you doing? Get to the escape pods now." She looked out at the approaching darkness. Long-range sensors showed the Devourer fleet emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. Massive ships that looked like holes in reality itself, surrounded by smaller vessels that seemed to absorb light. Behind them came the harvesting swarms, countless smaller entities that would consume every atom of the research station once the main force had broken its defenses. But Mira wasn't afraid. She was angry. The Council species had written off humanity as insignificant. They had kept Earth isolated and ignored human offers to help with galactic problems. When humans had volunteered to serve in Council military forces, they were politely declined. When human scientists had proposed new technologies, they were dismissed as primitive. Now, the mighty Galactic Council was running away from an enemy they couldn't defeat, and they still hadn't thought to ask humans for help. Mira activated the escape pod and launched just as the Devourer Vanguard reached the research station. She watched through the pod's small window as the alien facility was consumed by darkness. The attacking ships didn't explode or burn the station. They simply touched it, and it ceased to exist. But her message was already racing toward Earth at faster-than-light speed. As her escape pod's engines carried her away from the dying star system, Mira smiled. The Council had underestimated humanity for centuries. They saw humans as emotional, illogical, and primitive. They thought human stubbornness was a weakness, and human creativity was chaotic. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Somewhere in the void behind her, the Devourers continued their feast. They had consumed another star system, growing stronger with each victory. Their ancient hunger drove them forward toward the galaxy's populated core, where trillions of beings waited in fear. But for the first time since the invasion began, someone had sent a signal not of surrender or retreat, but of defiance. The message carried with it humanity's first real glimpse of the wider galaxy, and the galaxy's first real hope for salvation. The signal reached Earth 6 hours later, carrying with it a call to war that would awaken something the universe had never seen before. Humanity unleashed. The massive holographic display in Earth's Strategic Command Center showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas where the Devourers had already consumed entire star systems. Yellow zones indicated regions under immediate threat. The blue zones, representing safe Council territory, were shrinking by the day. Admiral Rebecca Hayes stood before the display, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Around her, hundreds of technicians and officers worked at control, stations that hummed with activity. 6 months had passed since Dr. Mira Thorne's desperate transmission had reached Earth, and humanity had responded in a way that surprised everyone, including themselves. The first phase had been information gathering. Human intelligence agencies, long relegated to monitoring Earth's own political situations, had turned their attention to the galaxy. They intercepted Council military communications, analyzed enemy movement patterns, and studied every available piece of data about the Devourers. What they discovered was that the Council was losing badly. The second phase had been mobilization. Every major nation on Earth had contributed resources to what became known as Project Breakthrough. Factories that had built cars and computers were retooled to produce weapon systems. Universities that had studied theoretical physics were tasked with developing faster-than-light engines. Military academies began training officers for space combat they had never imagined. Now came the third phase, deployment. Captain Tom Bradley walked onto the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest heavy cruiser. Unlike the elegant curves of Council ships, human vessels looked like flying fortresses. Angular armor plating covered every surface. Weapon turrets bristled from the hull. Engine sections glowed with the blue fire of fusion reactors pushed beyond their recommended limits. Status. "Report," Bradley ordered as he took his command chair. "All systems operational, Captain," his tactical officer replied. 46 other ships report ready for hyperspace jump. Admiral Hayes is standing by. Bradley nodded. The human fleet was smaller than Council battle groups, but it had been designed specifically to fight devourers. Every weapon system, every defensive measure, every tactical doctrine had been created based on the intelligence Mira had provided. Dr. Yuki Tanaka sat in the science station next to the captain's chair. As the fleet's chief xenobiologist, she had spent months studying council species and their failed attempts to stop the devourers. Her analysis had revealed something crucial. The galactic civilizations had been fighting the wrong kind of war. "Receiving transmission from Admiral Hayes," the communications officer announced. The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen. Behind her, Earth hung in space like a blue and white jewel. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. Today we make first contact with our galactic neighbors. They're expecting us to fail like everyone else has. Let's prove them wrong. Execute jump sequence." Space twisted around the human fleet as 47 ships engaged their hyperspace drives simultaneously. The journey to Council territory would take 3 days, crossing distances that had taken the first Earth explorers months to travel. During the voyage, Dr. Tanaka briefed the crew on what they could expect. The Council species communicated through complex diplomatic protocols. They fought wars with precision and elegance, treating combat like a sophisticated chess game. They valued logic above emotion and careful planning above quick action. "The devourers have adapted to fight this kind of enemy," she explained to the senior officers. "They're used to facing opponents who retreat when casualties mount, who negotiate when defeat seems likely, and who fight defensively to minimize losses." Captain Bradley smiled grimly. "Then they're not used to fighting humans?" The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Vorthak home system. Immediately, their sensors detected massive energy signatures. A battle was in progress. The crystalline ships of the Vorthak defense fleet were arranged in perfect geometric formations, their weapons firing coordinated energy beams at the approaching devourer forces. The alien attackers moved like living shadows, their ships seeming to absorb the light around them. Where Vorthak weapons struck devourer hulls, the energy was consumed and converted into forward momentum. "Council forces are losing," the tactical officer reported. "Devourer fleet outnumbers them 3-1 and their weapons are ineffective." Admiral Hayes's voice came through the communication system. "All ships, engage the enemy. Show them how humans fight." What happened next would be remembered as the moment everything changed. Human ships abandoned elegant formations and charged directly into the devourer fleet. Instead of energy weapons, they unleashed torrents of kinetic projectiles. Tungsten rods accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed slammed into alien hulls. Nuclear warheads detonated in coordinated patterns, creating electromagnetic pulses that disrupted devourer systems. But the real shock came when human ships deployed their secret weapon: gravity bombs. Dr. Chen, working from the Human Research Vessel Breakthrough, had discovered that devourers were vulnerable to gravitational distortion. Their ability to absorb energy became a liability when faced with weapons that manipulated space-time itself. The first gravity bomb detonated between 2 devourer dreadnoughts. Space warped and twisted, crushing the alien ships like paper balls. The surviving devourers, ancient beings that had consumed countless galaxies, encountered something they had never faced before: an enemy that fought with pure aggression and refused to retreat. Captain Bradley watched his tactical display as human ships pressed their attack. "Tanaka, are you reading this data correctly?" The scientist checked her instruments twice before answering. "Captain, the Devourer fleet is withdrawing. They're actually running away." On the council frequency, Vorthak commanders were broadcasting in amazement. Their crystal song language, normally so controlled and melodious, cracked with emotion as they watched human ships chase retreating devourers across the system. Admiral Hayes opened a communication channel to the Vorthak fleet commander. "This is Admiral Hayes of the Earth Federation. We received a distress call from Dr. Mira Thorne. We're here to help." The Vorthak response came after a long pause, their translated words filled with wonder. "Who are you? What species fights like this?" "We're human," Hayes replied simply, "and we don't surrender." As the battle ended and rescue operations began, word of humanity's arrival spread across Council communication networks. The species that had been dismissed as primitive had just accomplished what the galaxy's finest military forces could not. They had made the Devourers retreat. In the days that followed, human fleet groups began appearing throughout Council space. Each engagement followed the same pattern. Where Council forces had failed with precision and careful tactics, human ships succeeded through overwhelming firepower and relentless aggression. The galaxy was learning that humanity's reputation for being emotional and chaotic wasn't a weakness. In a war against beings that fed on fear and despair, human stubbornness and refusal to accept defeat were becoming the deadliest weapons in the arsenal. The underwater city of Coral 9 had been the pride of the Deepkin civilization for over 2,000 years. Built in the depths of an ocean world, its bioluminescent towers stretched from the sea floor to just below the surface. Millions of aquatic beings had called it home, living in harmony with the planet's natural ecosystem. Now it was a war zone. Colonel Marcus Webb crouched behind the wreckage of a Deepkin transport vessel, salt water dripping from his armored suit. Around him, his Marine squad prepared their weapons and checked their equipment one final time. Through his helmet's display, he could see the tactical situation painted in glowing red and blue icons. The Devourers had arrived at Coral 9 3 days ago. Their massive ships had descended through the planet's atmosphere and submerged into the oceans. Unlike their usual method of consuming everything instantly, they seemed to be harvesting the city slowly, feeding on the terror of the trapped population. Human. Intelligence had discovered why. The Devourers weren't just destroyers. They were parasites that grew stronger by absorbing the fear and despair of their victims. The longer they could keep a population alive and terrified, the more energy they could harvest. It was a perfect trap, designed to lure rescue forces into a prolonged battle where the enemy would grow stronger with every passing hour. The Council. Species had recognized the trap and stayed away. Their military doctrine called for strategic withdrawal when faced with unwinnable situations. Saving Coral 9 would require exactly the kind of costly frontal assault that went against everything they had learned about warfare. Humans, however, had different ideas about unwinnable situations. "Colonel Webb, this is Admiral Hayes." The voice crackled through his communication system. "Marine landing forces cleared to begin assault. Show them how we fight," Webb signaled to his troops. 47 human Marines, equipped with experimental-powered armor and weapons designed specifically for underwater combat, began their advance toward the captured city. The first Devourer bioforms appeared as shadows in the murky water. They looked like enormous jellyfish made of living darkness, their tentacles reaching toward the approaching humans. Council forces had learned to fear these creatures, whose touch could drain the life from any organic being. The Marines opened fire, with plasma rifles that had been adapted for underwater use. Superheated energy bolts turned seawater to steam as they struck their targets. The Devourer scouts writhed and dissolved, their forms unable to maintain cohesion against the concentrated heat. But Marcus knew the real battle was just beginning. As the human force advanced deeper into the city, they encountered the Devourers' main feeding apparatus. Massive organic structures had grown throughout Coral 9's streets, pulsing with dark energy as they slowly drained the life from captured Deepkin civilians. The alien architecture of the city had been twisted and corrupted. turned into a vast feeding web. "This is Dr. Alex Chen aboard the Indomitable," came a transmission from the command ship orbiting above. "I'm reading massive bioenergy fluctuations from your location. The Devourers are using the civilians as living batteries." Webb studied the tactical display on his helmet's screen. Traditional military doctrine would call for a careful, methodical approach to avoid civilian casualties. The Council species would have spent days planning the perfect assault to minimize losses. Humans, however, had learned something different from their long history of warfare. Sometimes the fastest way to save lives was to hit the enemy so hard and fast that they didn't have time to hurt anyone else. "All units, switch to high-explosive rounds," Webb ordered. "We're going to tear this place apart." The battle that followed would have horrified Council military observers. Human Marines charged directly into Devourer defensive positions, their powered armor allowing them to shrug off attacks that would have killed unprotected soldiers. Instead of trying to preserve the city's architecture, they used demolition charges and heavy weapons to collapse entire sections of the feeding structures. Each time a feeding node was destroyed, captured Deepkin civilians were freed from the draining effect. But the Devourers responded by growing stronger, absorbing energy from their anger at losing their food source. That was when the aliens learned something important about human psychology. Sergeant Rita Murphy led her squad through a collapsed section of the city where they found a group of Deepkin children trapped in a feeding pod. The young aliens were barely conscious, their life energy nearly completely drained. Any other species might have felt despair at seeing such suffering. Instead, Murphy felt rage. "You bastards picked the wrong planet to mess with," she growled, raising her plasma rifle toward the nearest Devourer spawn. The bioluminescent creatures that had been slowly draining the children suddenly began writhing in apparent pain. Dr. Chen's voice came through the communication system, filled with excitement. "Colonel, I'm reading something incredible. The Devourers aren't getting stronger from human emotions. They're actually getting weaker." Webb paused in his advance through the city's central plaza. Around him, his Marines were systematically destroying every Devourer structure they could find, their faces grim with determination. "Explain, Doc." "The Devourers feed on fear, despair, and feelings of helplessness," Chen replied. "But humans don't seem to experience those emotions the same way other species do. When you see something terrible, you don't feel hopeless. You get angry. You want to fight back. That kind of emotional response is like poison to them." The revelation changed everything about the battle. Instead of trying to minimize their emotional responses like Council troops had been trained to do, the human Marines embraced their anger. Every dead civilian they found made them fight harder. Every Devourer victory made them more determined to win. As the assault continued, something unprecedented happened. The Devourers began to retreat. Colonel Webb stood in the ruins of Coral 9's central feeding complex, watching his demolition experts place charges on the main bioreactor. Around them, thousands of freed Deepkin civilians were being evacuated by human medics. The ancient enemy that had terrorized the galaxy was pulling back, their ships rising from the ocean depths. "Admiral Hayes, this is Colonel Webb," he reported. "Coral 9 is secure. Enemy forces are in full retreat." The Admiral's response carried a note of amazement. "Confirmed, Colonel. Long-range sensors show the entire Devourer fleet leaving the system. They're actually running away from us." News of the victory at Coral 9 spread across Council communication networks faster than light. The Deepkin, rescued from certain death, began broadcasting testimonials about human courage and determination. Other species that had been hiding from the Devourers started requesting human assistance, but the real impact was psychological. For the first time since the invasion began, the galaxy had proof that the Devourers could be defeated. The ancient beings that had consumed countless civilizations had met an enemy they couldn't understand or overcome. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, monitoring the battle from her research ship, sent a report to Earth that would reshape galactic military doctrine. The Council species fight with their minds. They plan, they calculate, they try to minimize risk. The Devourers have adapted to defeat that kind of thinking. But humans fight with their hearts. They get angry when they see injustice. They refuse to accept defeat. They become more dangerous when cornered. Against an enemy that feeds on despair, human stubbornness might be the deadliest weapon in the galaxy. As human forces began spreading throughout Council space, they carried with them something the galaxy had forgotten: the absolute conviction that any problem could be solved if you were willing to fight hard enough and refuse to give up. The war was far from over, but for the first time the outcome was no longer certain. The ancient structure floated in the void between stars, a massive construct that defied understanding. Commander Lisa Park guided her reconnaissance ship closer, her instruments struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. The object was larger than Earth's moon, but it seemed to bend space around itself, making accurate measurements impossible. "This has to be it," she whispered to her navigation officer. "The source of the Devourer invasion." 3 weeks had passed since human forces had pushed the enemy back from 17 different star systems. The aliens that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 years were retreating toward the galactic core, and Command had ordered deep reconnaissance missions to find out why. Lisa's ship, the UES Discovery, was one of 12 vessels that had followed the enemy fleet into unexplored space. What they found there challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about the Devourers. "Commander, I'm picking up massive energy readings from inside that structure," her science officer reported. "And something else. Organic signatures. Millions of them." Lisa activated the ship's most powerful scanners. The readings that came back made her breath catch in her throat. The structure wasn't just a ship or a space station. It was alive. And inside it were the life signs of countless beings that definitely weren't Devourers. "Open a channel to Admiral Hayes," she ordered. "Priority Alpha encryption." The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen within minutes. Behind her, the command center of the UES Indomitable buzzed with activity as human forces coordinated operations across dozens of star systems. "What have you found out there, Commander?" Lisa shared her sensor readings. "Admiral, this structure contains what appear to be preserved specimens from hundreds of different species. Some of the genetic patterns match records from civilizations that were supposedly destroyed by the Devourers centuries ago." Admiral Hayes frowned as she studied the data. "Are you saying the Devourers have been keeping prisoners?" "I don't think they're prisoners, Admiral. I think they're something else entirely." Before Hayes could respond, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the Discovery. A massive Devourer vessel was approaching from the structure's far side. But it wasn't moving aggressively. Instead, it seemed to be escorting them. "Commander Park," came a voice through the communication system. The words were spoken in perfect English, but the tone was unlike anything human or alien that Lisa had ever heard. It carried the weight of unimaginable age and sadness. "I am the Queen Mind of the Devourer fleet. I request permission to communicate." Lisa looked at her crew in shock. In 2 years of warfare, no Devourer had ever attempted communication. They had been viewed as mindless destroyers, incapable of negotiation or reason. "Admiral, are you receiving this?" Hayes nodded grimly. "Patch me through, Commander. Let's hear what it has to say." The voice that spoke next seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the ship's hull as much as through the communication speakers. "I am ancient beyond your ability to comprehend. I have consumed 1,000 galaxies and watched universes die. But never have I encountered a species like yours. What do you want?" Admiral Hayes demanded. "To understand. Your people fight with a fury that strengthens rather than weakens them. You become more dangerous when faced with defeat. You offer mercy to enemies who have shown you none. You are unprecedented." Lisa watched her instruments as the massive, alien structure began to change. Sections of its hull became transparent, revealing the interior chambers that held countless preserved life forms. Each chamber contained beings from different worlds, different eras, all suspended in some form of stasis. "My God," she whispered. "Admiral, I think those aren't war trophies. I think they're refugees." The Queen Mind's voice carried what might have been surprise. "You understand? How is this possible? No species has ever seen truth in our actions." "What truth?" Hayes asked. "We are not destroyers. We are the last survivors of our universe. We consume because we must, or cease to exist entirely. Each galaxy we harvest provides energy to sustain these few remnants of countless dead civilizations. We are the final memory of worlds that entropy claimed eons ago." The revelation struck the human commanders like a physical blow. The enemy that had seemed like mindless monsters were actually refugees from a dying universe, desperately trying to preserve some trace of the countless species that had already been lost to cosmic entropy. "But why attack our galaxy?" Lisa asked. "Why not ask for help?" "Because there has never been help to ask for. Every species we have encountered has fought us with desperation born of fear. They see only death and destruction, never understanding that we carry within us the preserved essence of 1,000,000,000,000 worlds. Their terror feeds us, yes, but it also clouds their judgment. They become what we need them to become, sources of energy, to sustain the dead." Admiral Hayes felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. "How many universes have you harvested?" "Countless. Each one follows the same pattern. Fear leads to desperation. Desperation leads to stronger fear. The cycle continues until all energy is consumed, and we must move on to find another galaxy to sustain us. But not this time," Hayes said quietly. "No. Your species breaks the pattern. When faced with extinction, you do not despair. You become angry. When shown mercy, you do not feel relief. You feel obligation to show mercy in return. When confronted with an impossible enemy, you do not seek escape. You seek understanding." Commander Park studied her tactical displays as more Devourer ships approached. But instead of attack formations, they were arranging themselves in what looked almost like an honor guard. "Queen Mind, what happens if we find another solution? Something that doesn't require consuming our galaxy?" The ancient voice was quiet for a long moment. "In all our eons of existence, no species has ever asked that question. The concept of a solution that preserves both destroyer and victim is foreign to our understanding." Dr. Alex Chen's voice crackled through from the command ship. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the energy readings from that structure. The Devourers aren't just preserving alien species. They're running a massive life support system for an entire universe's worth of refugees. The energy requirements are staggering, Admiral." Hayes felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. "Queen Mind, what if we could provide that energy without destroying inhabited worlds? What if there was a way to sustain your preserved civilizations without consuming ours?" "Impossible. We have calculated every alternative across millions of years. There is insufficient free energy in any universe to sustain such a system without harvesting living worlds." "Maybe you haven't been thinking about it the right way," Hayes replied with a slight smile. "You've been dealing with species that think in terms of conservation and efficiency. You've never dealt with humans. We specialize in impossible solutions." The Queen Mind was silent for several minutes. When it spoke again, its voice carried something that might have been hope. "You would attempt to save us? Even after we have devastated your galaxy?" "That's what humans do," Lisa said simply. "We save people, even when they don't think they can be saved, even when they've been trying to destroy us. This concept, mercy toward the enemy, it is not logical." Admiral Hayes laughed. "Logic is overrated. Sometimes the best solutions come from being completely unreasonable about what's possible." As the human reconnaissance fleet prepared to return to Council space with their impossible discovery, the Queen Mind spoke one final time. If such a solution exists, if there is truly a way to preserve both our peoples, we will cease our harvesting operations. We will wait. The discovery changed everything about the war. The galaxy was no longer fighting mindless destroyers, but the desperate survivors of cosmic catastrophe. And humanity, the species that everyone had written off as primitive and emotional, had done something unprecedented. They had made the impossible enemy stop fighting by offering them something no one had ever offered before: hope. Dr. Alex Chen had not slept in 4 days. His laboratory aboard the research station Genesis Prime buzzed with activity as scientists from 7 different species worked around the clock on the most ambitious project in galactic history: coffee. Cups and energy drink containers littered every available surface, while holographic displays showed complex mathematical equations that hurt to look at directly. The project had a simple goal and an impossible execution: build a gateway that could open passages to uninhabited parallel universes where the Devourers could rebuild their civilization without consuming existing life. The theory was sound. The practical application required rewriting the laws of physics. "Chen, you need to see this," called Dr. Yuki Tanaka from across the laboratory. She stood before a massive display showing dimensional calculation matrices that stretched beyond human comprehension. "The Mindari telepaths have found something in the quantum resonance data." Chen hurried over, his exhaustion forgotten. For 3 months, every species in the galaxy had contributed their greatest scientific minds to Project Genesis. The Vorthak had grown crystalline computation arrays larger than city blocks. The Deepkin had provided biological computers that could process information in ways silicon-based systems never could. The synthetics had linked their mechanical consciousness to create a distributed intelligence network spanning multiple star systems. And at the center of it all, human engineers had done what they did best. They had found ways to make the impossible work. What did the Mindari discover? Chen asked. Tanaka pointed to a section of the display where probability curves intersected in patterns that defied logic. "They've been using their telepathic abilities to explore the quantum foam that exists between dimensions. They found natural, weak points where the barrier between universes is already thin." Chen studied the data with growing excitement. Natural dimensional boundaries would require significantly less energy to breach than artificial ones. Instead of needing to tear holes in reality itself, they could simply widen existing cracks. How many usable weak points did they locate? 17 so far, and they're finding more every day. Each one leads to a universe that appears to be completely empty of intelligent life, but rich in resources. Across the laboratory, Admiral Rebecca Hayes watched the scientific chaos with a mixture of pride and terror. The project that had begun with her impossible promise to the Queen Mind was actually taking shape, but the implications were staggering. They were about to give universe-hopping technology to beings who had already consumed countless galaxies. Captain Tom Bradley approached with a tablet full of military reports. "Admiral, I've got updates from the defense perimeter. Council fleets are requesting permission to attack the Devourer staging areas. Their commanders think we've gone insane." Hayes nodded grimly. She understood their concern. For 8 months, the Devourer fleet had remained motionless in deep space while Genesis was under construction. The ancient beings had kept their word about ceasing hostilities, but many Council species viewed the pause as an opportunity to strike while the enemy was vulnerable. "What's the status of the gateway construction?" Bradley consulted his tablet. "The primary dimensional resonance chamber is 60% complete. The Rootborn are growing the bio-neural networks that will control dimensional targeting. The Hive Builders have finished the quantum stabilization matrix. Engineering estimates another 6 weeks until we can attempt the first test activation." Hayes studied the tactical displays showing Devourer fleet positions. Massive ships that had once terrorized the galaxy now floated peacefully in formation, waiting for humanity to deliver on its impossible promise. Dr. Chen's voice echoed across the laboratory. All department heads, we're ready for the preliminary resonance test. This will be a low-power activation to verify our dimensional calculations are correct. Scientists from across the galaxy gathered around the central control platform. The device they had built looked more like a work of art than a scientific instrument. Crystalline structures grown by the Vorthak provided the computational matrix. Organic neural networks created by the root-born processed quantum data flows. Synthetic. Mechanical systems maintained perfect stability. Human engineering held it all together with solutions that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Commander Lisa Park watched from the observation deck as energy began flowing through the dimensional gateway. She had spent months coordinating with the Queen Mind, establishing protocols for the evacuation of preserved alien species to their new home universes. The ancient being had provided detailed information about each suspended civilization, including their environmental needs and cultural preferences. It was the most complex refugee resettlement operation in cosmic history. Dimensional barrier resonance at 12%, called one of the Vorthak technicians. Quantum stability holding within acceptable parameters. Chen monitored energy flows that danced across his displays like living things. Increase power to 15%. Let's see if the gateway can maintain coherence. The space in front of the dimensional resonance chamber began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist as the gateway attempted to pierce the barrier between universes. For a moment, everyone in the laboratory held their breath. Then it happened. A window opened in space itself, revealing a view of another universe. Through the portal, they could see stars and planets that had never known the touch of intelligent life. Empty worlds rich with resources, waiting for new civilizations to call them home. Dimensional breach established, Chen announced, his voice filled with wonder. Gateway is stable and maintaining coherence. We're looking at universe designation Alpha 7. Admiral Hayes activated her communication system. Queen Mind, are you receiving our transmission? The ancient voice that responded carried emotions that had not been heard in eons. We see it, a doorway to worlds that could sustain our preserved ones without requiring the consumption of existing life. How is this possible? Because humans are too stubborn to accept that problems can't be solved, Hayes replied. Are you ready to begin the transfer operations? We have been ready for longer than your species has existed. But first, there is something you must understand. The energy cost of maintaining our preservation systems during the transfer will be enormous. Someone must provide power equivalent to the consumption of 3-star systems. The laboratory fell silent. After months of work, they had solved the dimensional gateway problem only to discover another impossible requirement. Dr. Chen studied his calculations frantically. Admiral, our power generation systems can't produce that much energy. The entire galaxy's combined output wouldn't be sufficient. Admiral Hayes felt the weight of failure pressing down on her. They had come so close to a solution that would save both civilizations, only to be stopped by simple energy requirements. That was when Dr. Tanaka spoke up with the quiet confidence that had characterized human contributions throughout the project. What if we don't try to generate the power? What if we borrow it? Chen looked at her in confusion. Borrow it from where? From the future. Tanaka activated a display showing temporal mechanics equations that made the dimensional calculations look simple by comparison. The gateway doesn't just pierce space, it creates controlled distortions in space-time. We could establish a temporal energy loop, borrowing power from the successful completion of the transfer to fund the transfer itself. The alien scientists stared at her in shock. Temporal mechanics was considered impossibly dangerous by every galactic civilization. The risk of creating paradoxes or breaking causality had kept it firmly in the realm of theoretical study. "That's completely insane," Chen said after a moment. "The temporal stress could tear apart local space-time. We could accidentally erase this entire star system from existence." Tanaka smiled. "You're probably right, but it might work." Admiral Hayes looked around the laboratory at the assembled scientists. Representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were shaking their heads in disbelief at the human proposal. The plan violated every principle of safe scientific practice. "Dr. Tanaka, what are the odds of success?" "Honestly, about 30%. But Admiral, those are better odds than we had when we started this project." Captain Bradley stepped forward. "Admiral, I've got an update from Earth Command. They're asking for a status report on Genesis. What should I tell them?" Hayes considered her options. She could recommend that the project be abandoned as too dangerous. The Council would approve, grateful to avoid the risks of temporal experimentation. The Devourers would resume their harvesting, but at least the galaxy wouldn't accidentally destroy itself. Or she could authorize the most dangerous scientific experiment in galactic history based on calculations that had a 70% chance of killing everyone in the star system. "Tell Earth Command that we're proceeding with final implementation," she said finally, "and patch me through to all Council fleet commanders." Within minutes, representatives from every major galactic civilization were listening to her words. "Leaders of the Galactic Council, in 48 hours, we will attempt to open permanent dimensional gateways to uninhabited universes. The Devourer fleet will begin transferring their preserved civilizations to new homes where they can rebuild without threatening existing life." The response was immediate chaos. Council commanders demanded to know why they hadn't been consulted. Scientists protested that the temporal risks were unacceptable. Military leaders suggested it would be safer to simply destroy the Devourer fleet while they remained passive. Admiral Hayes listened to the arguments for several minutes before cutting them off. "The decision has been made. Humanity takes full responsibility for the consequences. If the experiment fails and destroys this star system, the galaxy will be safer without us. If it succeeds, both our civilizations survive." The Queen Mind's voice cut through the debate. "Admiral Hayes, your species continues to amaze us. You risk everything to save beings who have been your enemies. This concept of sacrifice for others, it is perhaps the most alien thing we have ever encountered. It's what makes us human," Hayes replied simply. 48 hours later, Genesis Prime hummed with power levels that pushed every system beyond its design limits. The dimensional gateway expanded until it could accommodate the massive Devourer preservation ships. Temporal energy flowed backward through time itself, creating a paradox that somehow sustained itself through sheer impossibility. One by one, the ancient ships began their journey to new universes. Each vessel carried millions of preserved beings, from civilizations that had died eons ago, finally returning to life in worlds where they could build new futures without destroying others. Dr. Chen watched his instruments as the temporal energy loop stabilized against all mathematical probability. "Admiral, I don't understand how this is working. The calculations say it should be impossible." Admiral Hayes smiled as she watched the last Devourer ship disappear through the dimensional gateway. "Dr. Chen, you've been working with humans for months now. Haven't you learned anything about us?" "What do you mean?" "We specialize in making impossible things work. Sometimes the universe just has to adjust its rules to accommodate human stubbornness. As the dimensional gateways closed and the temporal energy loop dissipated, the galaxy found itself forever changed. The greatest threat in its history had been transformed into its greatest triumph. Species that had been enemies were now neighbors. Technologies that had been thought impossible were now routine. And at the center of it all, Humanity had earned its place not through conquest or superior technology, but by refusing to accept that problems couldn't be solved if you were willing to think creatively enough about the solutions. The hidden signal that Dr. Mira Thorne had sent from a dying research station had indeed changed everything forever. It had brought humanity to the stars not as conquerors, but as the species that could look at the impossible and say, "Let's try it anyway." In the years that followed, human ships would spread throughout the galaxy and beyond, carrying with them the most dangerous idea in the universe: that any problem could be solved if you were too stubborn to give up and too creative to accept conventional limitations. The galaxy had learned something from humanity's response to the Devourer crisis. Sometimes the most important victories came not from being the strongest or the smartest, but from being absolutely convinced that there had to be a better way and being willing to risk everything to find it.